if I told you there is a chapter in the Bible so powerful, so dangerous to the enemy, that for centuries it has been called the prayer of protection, a psalm that promises you will walk through fire and not be burned, that armies may fall around you, but you will still stand. That psalm is Psalm 91. But here's the secret most people don't know. Psalm 91 is not just poetry. It is a covenant, and if you understand it, it can change your life forever. In the next few minutes, we're going to break down every verse, not with theory, but with the real stories from the Bible that prove these promises are true. By the end of this video, you'll see Psalm 91 in a way you've never seen it before, and once you see it, you'll never read it the same way again. Verse 1, Psalm 91. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. These words seem like a promise of security, but they hide a deeper meaning. Imagine the following: the people of Israel in the wilderness after leaving Egypt. The sun was relentless, the desert was endless, and their strength began to fail. Yet every single day, God covered them with a cloud by day and fire by night. Exodus 13:21. Just when they thought they could not go on, his shadow gave them rest. What was once unbearable now became possible. This is what the verse really means. To dwell under the shadow of the Almighty is not a guarantee that you will never face storms, that life will be easy, or that you will not have to walk through your own deserts. It is much deeper. The key is in the word dwell. It is not a temporary refuge. It is not an occasional visit. It is a life decision. This verse is not for those who seek an easy way out. It is for those willing to remain even when things turn dark and difficult. To dwell in the shelter of the Most High means to accept that although chaos continues outside, your soul will find rest under his shadow. But not everyone can find it. Not because God hides it, but because to find it you must cross a threshold that few are willing to cross, the threshold of total surrender. To live under that shadow, you must let go of everything else, and that is where most people fail. Because Psalm 91 is a covenant of protection that requires unshakable surrender. But there is something else hidden in this verse, something not many see. The shadow of the Almighty is not only protection, it is also a test that few overcome. To dwell in the shelter of the Most High is not for the lukewarm. It is not for those who only seek temporary comfort. It is for those who are willing to face their worst fears, knowing that even when everything else fails, that shadow will still be there, unshakable. Think about Elijah alone under a broom tree, praying for his life to end, 1 Kings 19:4. He felt finished, but in that moment, God sent an angel with food and water. Under that shadow, Elijah found strength again. By taking shelter under the shadow of the Almighty, you are entering into a deeper relationship with him, a relationship in which you cannot hide. You are exposed, vulnerable. It is in that place where your fears, your doubts, and your darkest secrets come to light. And just when you think that shadow will only give you relief, you realize it is also transforming you. For many, that transformation is terrifying, because when you draw near to the Almighty, you cannot remain the same person. What truly lies behind the first verse is not only a promise of security, it is a challenge to remain firm under that shadow, even when the world is crumbling around you. A challenge to trust that even if the storm does not go away, even if the desert remains relentless, God is still your refuge. Just as a shadow provided Israel relief from the burning desert, the shadow of God offers rest and a security that the world cannot penetrate. Thus, Psalm 91 begins with an invitation to enter into a place of divine security, a call to live in a deep and constant relationship with the Creator, where we find our true refuge and strength. Verse 2, Psalm 91. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God, in whom I trust. At first, this verse seems simple, doesn't it? To declare that God is our refuge, our fortress, and that we trust in Him. It almost sounds like an everyday prayer, like something we say without thinking too much about it. But have you ever really stopped to break down what you are saying here? Because behind these words, there is a much deeper revelation. And like everything in Psalm 91, it also comes with a cost. First, think about the word refuge. We like the idea of a refuge, don't we? A place where we feel safe, where dangers cannot reach us. That safe corner we run to when life becomes difficult. But here is the unexpected part. To say that God is your refuge means something more than simply seeking protection when danger appears. It means recognizing that outside of that refuge, there is nothing safe. In fact, there is nowhere else to run. Think about Noah. While the whole world drowned under the flood, only those inside the ark survived. Genesis 7:23. That ark was their refuge. Outside of it, there was no safety. The same is true when you call God your refuge. Outside of Him, there is no other shelter. And here is where the conflict begins, because if you are really honest with yourself, you will realize that many times you trust more in the things you can control, your relationships, your job, your money. Those are your fortresses, your refuges. So when you say, "You are my refuge," do you truly mean it? Have you really let go of everything else? Because the truth is, this verse is not just a declaration of faith. It is a confrontation with your own fears. It is an invitation to release everything you think gives you security and to trust completely in something you cannot see, in something you cannot control. Now let's go to the word fortress. A refuge is where you hide. But a fortress is where you prepare to fight. By saying that God is your fortress, you are declaring that He will not only protect you, but also give you strength to face whatever battle comes. But what happens if the battle is not the one you thought it would be? Think of young David standing before Goliath, 1 Samuel 17:45. He had no sword, no armor, no chance in human eyes. Yet he said, "I come to you in the name of the Lord Almighty." That is what it means for God to be your fortress, not escaping the fight, but finding the strength to face giants that should destroy you. And what about the fear that no one sees? How many times have you felt paralyzed by the fear that creeps into your mind on the darkest nights? The one that tells you that you are not good enough, that you will not make it, that you are alone. That is the real battle. And when you declare that God is your fortress, you are saying that He is the only one who can give you the strength to rise and fight against those inner demons, those shadows that whisper in your ear that you are not enough. That strength does not come without pain. It does not come without struggle. When you say, "You are my fortress," you are not asking for a life without problems. You are asking for the ability to endure, to persevere, to keep moving forward even when everything seems against you. You are recognizing that the fight will not disappear, and more than that you will have to fight every single day. Because trusting in God is not a passive act. It is an active war against everything that tries to separate you from Him. And above all, against everything within yourself that tries to disconnect you from that faith. And then we come to the key point, "My God, in whom I trust." This is the climax of the verse, trust. Easy to say, hard to live. Because deep down, to trust in God means one thing, to let go of control. And if we are really honest, that is the hardest part, isn't it? How many times have you said you trust in God, but deep down you were creating your own escape plan, your own plan B? Think about Daniel in the lion's den, Daniel 6:22. He had no plan B. The lions were real, the danger was real, yet his trust in God shut their mouths. That is what it means when you say, "My God, in whom I trust." To say that you trust in God is to accept that you are no longer the one holding the reins, that your solutions and your answers are not enough. And that is terrifying. Trust means that when everything seems to be going wrong, you still believe He has a plan. Trust means looking around and seeing the world falling apart, but knowing deep in your soul that somehow you're in the right hands. And here lies the true challenge, because trusting God is not just when everything is going well, it is when everything is going wrong. It is easy to say, "I trust in you," when things are under control. But can you keep trusting when you lose that control, when everything you knew vanishes, when there's no sign that things will get better? That is what lies behind this verse. It is not a simple prayer. It is a challenge, a radical decision, because trusting in God is not the easy way out. In fact, it is the exact opposite. It is saying, even if I do not understand, even if I do not see it, even if I do not feel it, I still believe in you. And it is in that moment when you discover the true power of these words. Because when everything else fails, when every refuge you built collapses, when your personal strength is not enough, it is there, in that place of absolute vulnerability, that you find that God has been there the whole time, your refuge, your fortress, the only one in whom you can truly trust. True strength is not the absence of fear, but the ability to move forward in spite of it. And that is when these words come alive in a way you never imagined. Verses 3 and 4, Psalm 91. Surely He will save you from the fowler's snare and from the deadly pestilence. He will cover you with His feathers, and under His wings you will find refuge. His truth will be your shield and rampart. Imagine for a moment Joseph in Egypt. His brothers had trapped him, sold him, and left him for dead. Genesis 37:28. It was a snare carefully set, a human trap that seemed to end his story. But God turned that snare into a stepping stone. The one who was hunted became the one who saved nations. This is the power of the verse, because not all the snares you face are out there. Some are inside your own heart. What is the fowler, the hunter? The hunter is not always someone chasing you with a weapon. Sometimes it is that inner voice that traps you with doubt, fear, and despair. The snares this verse speaks of are not only external situations. They are also those invisible traps that the enemy lays in your mind. The dark thoughts that tell you there is no escape, that you are not strong enough, that you will never make it. And the deadliest snare of all is not something you can see with your eyes. It is not a visible enemy. It is the silent despair that grows when you believe you are alone, when you think everything is lost. Think about Elijah. After his greatest victory, he ran into the wilderness and prayed to die. 1 Kings 19:4. The trap of despair had caught him. But under a broom tree, God sent an angel to feed him and give him strength. Even the prophet was not free from snares of the mind, but God covered him with His care. This is where the promise explodes with meaning. He will cover you with His feathers. Who would have imagined that God's protection would be pictured as feathers and wings? It sounds soft, almost fragile, but these wings are stronger than stone walls. Think of Ruth, who left everything to follow Naomi. She had nothing, but she was told she had come under the wings of the God of Israel. Ruth 2:12. Under those wings, Ruth found not only safety, but redemption and a new life. Under those wings, you learn that strength does not always look like steel or fire. Sometimes true strength is found in surrender, being vulnerable under God's care. And then comes the shock. His truth will be your shield and rampart. This is not just about hiding. This is about fighting. Because what is truth? Truth is more than nice words. Truth is a shield. Truth is a sword. It protects you from lies, from the ones the world throws at you, and from the ones you whisper to yourself. But here's the hard part. Sometimes the truth that saves you is also the truth you don't want to face. The truth about who you are. The truth about your fears. The truth about the changes you have been avoiding. For many, the most dangerous snares are not outside. They are inside. The illusions, the excuses, the self-deception you build so you don't have to face what hurts. That is the deadliest snare. Denial, refusing to see the truth, refusing to face what God is asking you to change. The shield of truth not only protects you from outside attacks, it also confronts you. Because once you hold on to truth, you cannot hide anymore. And here lies the key. By taking refuge under God's wings, you're not only asking for protection, you're also agreeing to live by His truth as your shield, which means no more living in lies, no more illusions. This verse, which at first seemed like a promise of safety, actually takes you into a deep confrontation with yourself. Because to be under God's wings, to be truly free from the hunter's snare, you must face the truth. And that is not always comfortable. It is not always what you want to hear, but it is the only way to find true refuge. And then, just when you thought this verse was only about protection, you realize it is also about transformation. Because under God's wings, you do not only find safety, you find a truth that changes you from within. A truth that asks you to be brave. A truth that asks you to look the hunter in the eyes and say, "You have no power over me." Verses 5 and 6, Psalm 91. You will not fear the terror of the night, nor the arrow that flies by day, nor the pestilence that stalks in the darkness, nor the plague that destroys at midday. This is one of those verses that when you read it, can sound like a promise of total immunity, a guarantee that nothing bad will ever happen to you. But if you stop and think for a moment, you know life is not that simple. Fear, arrows, and plagues do not magically disappear just because you read a psalm. So what does this really mean? What lies behind these words? The verse begins by saying, "You will not fear the terror of the night." And here comes the first question. What is that terror? Because night is the place where everything hidden takes shape, where the deepest worries you tried to ignore during the day come alive. The terror of the night is not just fear of physical danger. It is the fear of the unknown, the fear of the uncertain future, the shadows of your mind that only grow larger when the lights go out. Think of Jacob the night before meeting Esau, Genesis 32:7. He was terrified, unsure if his brother would forgive him or kill him. In the night, he wrestled with God until morning, and in that struggle, he learned that fear could not control him anymore. That is the terror of the night, and that is what God overcomes. Who has not felt that knot in the stomach when waking in the darkness of night, when the thoughts you tried to push aside during the day become uncontrollable? But the most surprising part is this. The verse does not say the terror of the night will disappear. It does not say the shadows will dissolve or the questions will vanish. What it says is, you will not fear, because fear is what truly paralyzes you, what traps you, what leaves you vulnerable. And just when you ask yourself how it is possible not to fear, the verse takes you to the next turn. Nor the arrow that flies by day. During the day, when everything seems under control, when the light reveals what is real, the arrows appear, and they are not always physical arrows. They are those words, those subtle attacks that wound you when you least expect it. Think of Nehemiah rebuilding the wall of Jerusalem, Nehemiah 4:17. By day, enemies mocked him, threatened him, and even tried to stop the work with arrows and plots. But Nehemiah said, "Our God will fight for us." The arrows still came, but they did not stop the mission. How many times in the clarity of day have you felt exposed, hurt by a word, a look, an unexpected act? These are the arrows that fly by day. You do not always see them coming, but when they arrive, they pierce you. But once again, the verse does not say there will be no arrows. It says, you will not fear them. And here is the key. It does not promise you a life without danger, without attacks, without pain. What it promises is something even deeper, that you will not live imprisoned by fear, because when you are free from fear, the arrows lose their power, the attacks lose their impact. And then the verse adds, nor the pestilence that stalks in the darkness, nor the plague that destroys at midday. Think of the plagues of Egypt, Exodus 12:29. In the darkness of night, death swept through the land, but the homes covered by the blood of the Lamb were spared. The plague was real, the danger was real, but God's people discovered that His covering was stronger. This is what the psalm is really offering: freedom from fear, not freedom from circumstances. But how is it possible not to fear in the face of such real threats? Here is the unexpected answer: trust. Not in your own strength, not in your ability to avoid danger, but in something greater, something that does not move with the storms of life. It is the confidence that although you cannot control what happens outside, you can control what happens inside you. And when you understand this, something changes. You realize that the real battle is not in avoiding arrows or hiding from pestilence. The real battle is conquering the fear that paralyzes you. And that is where you find the freedom this verse promises. Because yes, the night will still be dark, the arrows will still fly, the plagues will still stalk, but you will have changed. And then, not only will you live without fear, you will be invincible against the very things that once made you tremble. Verses 7 and 8, Psalm 91. 1,000 may fall at your side, 10,000 at your right hand, but it will not come near you. You will only observe with your eyes and see the punishment of the wicked. At first glance, this verse seems to promise absolute immunity, a divine protection that covers you while everything around you collapses. But if you stop to reflect, there is something darker and deeper hidden within these words, because this is not just a promise of protection, it is also a challenge to how you interpret chaos and justice. Picture the scene: Israel at the Red Sea, Exodus 14:28-29. Behind them, Pharaoh's army came in full force. The waters closed, and thousands of soldiers were swallowed up. Chaos, fear, and destruction surrounded them completely. Yet in the middle of it, God's people crossed on dry ground, untouched. To their left, thousands fell. To their right, 10,000 more, and still they walked forward in safety. The immediate question that rises is, how is it possible that in the midst of all this chaos, you remain standing? What keeps you firm when everything else is collapsing? It is not because you are immune to pain, nor because you are disconnected from suffering. Think of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace, Daniel 3:27. The fire killed those who threw them in, yet they stood untouched, walking in the flames with a fourth figure beside them. They were not spared from the fire, they were spared in the fire. That is the mystery of this verse. Then comes the most unsettling part. You will only observe with your eyes. This phrase sounds like an invitation to calmly watch, to see how the wicked receive their due. But what does it really mean to observe with your eyes? To open your eyes goes far beyond witnessing the downfall of the wicked. It is about seeing with clarity, perceiving what is truly happening at a deeper level. Because in that moment of chaos, when everything seems to be collapsing, it is easy to get trapped in fear, in despair, in the thirst for revenge, or in the satisfaction of watching others pay for their mistakes. But what this verse is asking of you is to see beyond, to open your eyes and perceive that even in the midst of destruction, something greater is at work. A divine justice that goes beyond your understanding, an order being restored even when at first glance everything looks like chaos. Think of the flood in Noah's day, Genesis 7:23. With his own eyes, Noah saw the whole earth covered by judgment. But while others perished, he realized that it was not his strength or wisdom that saved him. It was God's covenant. The ark was a gift, not something he built by human power alone. And here is the most surprising part. When you open your eyes, you do not only see God's judgment on others, you also begin to see yourself in a new way. You begin to realize that the protection surrounding you is not something you can earn, nor something you can control. It is a gift, a divine refuge that does not depend on what you do, but on who you are in Him. Verses 9 and 10, Psalm 91. If you say, "The Lord is my refuge," and you make the Most High your dwelling, no harm will overtake you, no disaster will come near your tent. This is one of those passages that many people read looking for almost magical security, as if by making God your refuge, suddenly all evil disappears, as if disaster would vanish before it even touched your door. But if life has taught us anything, it is that problems, difficulties, and crises do not respect easy promises. So what is really behind these verses? Think of Israel in Egypt on the night of the Passover, Exodus 12:23. Death swept through the land, but the homes marked with the blood of the Lamb were spared. Outside, cries of calamity filled the air. Inside, God's people rested under His promise. The storm still raged, but their tent was untouched. That is the hidden power of this verse. Here is where many get confused. They think being under God's protection means everything around them will be perfect, that they will be completely isolated from the chaos the world brings. But that is not the true meaning. The verse says, "No harm will overtake you, no disaster will come near your tent." But what happens when evil does seem to draw near? What happens when disaster does reach your home? Here lies the true understanding. What this verse really tells you is not that you will be exempt from the storm, but that in the midst of it your soul will remain firm. Disaster may surround you, it may knock at your door, but there is something it cannot touch: your inner peace, your connection with the divine. Think of Job. He lost his children, his wealth, even his health, Job 1:20. Everything outside collapsed, but the enemy could not destroy the place where his faith lived. Job's tent, the true dwelling of his soul, remained in God. That is why he could still say, "The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised." And here is the most striking truth. The real refuge is not physical. It is not something you can see with your eyes. It is a refuge built inside of you. It is the unexplainable peace that sustains you when evil attacks from all sides. So when the verse says, "No harm will overtake you," it is not talking about a life without difficulties. It is talking about an inner strength that allows you to walk through fire without being consumed, to pass through the valley of the shadow of death without your spirit breaking. Evil cannot touch what you have placed in God's hands. And here is the mystery. Your refuge is not the absence of problems. Your refuge is God Himself. What God offers you is not the elimination of storms, but His companionship in the midst of them. But the verse continues, "No disaster will come near your tent." This phrase can be confusing if taken literally, because all of us have seen disasters reach places where we thought God was present. But the true meaning is deeper. The tent mentioned here is not just a physical house. It is the place where your faith dwells, the inner home of your being, that space in your soul where you live with God. Think of David when Saul hunted him in the wilderness, 1 Samuel 23:14. He hid in caves, he slept in tents, and enemies were always near. Yet Scripture says God did not let Saul capture him. His tent, fragile as it was, remained under divine protection. And here's the key: disaster can destroy what is material, but it cannot touch what is eternal. Your home, your true home, is that place in your heart where you have chosen to make God your refuge. As long as God is your dwelling place, no calamity can destroy what really matters. This brings us to a crucial point. It is not that problems cease to exist when you make God your refuge. It is that their power over you fades. Evil loses its ability to control you. Calamities may touch what is external, but not what is eternal. That is where the true power of this verse lies. It is not a promise that you will not suffer. It is a promise that suffering will not define you, will not break you. This is the hidden secret many do not want to see, because it is easier to believe that God's protection means nothing bad will happen. But the reality is much more challenging and at the same time much more beautiful. What God offers you is the ability to walk through chaos without chaos entering you. He offers you a peace that does not depend on circumstances, a peace that survives the storm, that blossoms in the midst of destruction, and that sustains you when everything else falls to pieces. When you make the Lord your refuge, what you are doing is giving up control, giving up the illusion that you can prevent calamities from arriving. What you are doing is trusting that even when they do arrive, they will not have the last word. And this is the most powerful part. Calamity may come, but it cannot remain, because your home, your true home, is protected by something beyond what the world can touch. Your soul, your faith, your connection with God is what is truly under His protection. So what is really behind these verses? It is not a promise that you will never face storms. It is a promise that when you do, you will face them from a place of unshakable security. It is an invitation to live above fear, above circumstances. Because as long as your refuge is in God, it does not matter how strong the storm is or how many disasters threaten to destroy what you love, you will remain firm. And that is the true victory this passage promises. Verses 11 and 12. Psalm 91, "For he will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways. They will lift you up in their hands so that you will not strike your foot against a stone." Here, Psalm 91 reaches a fascinating and profound point. The promise that God Himself sends His angels to care for you, to lift you up when you fall. It is a powerful image, but as always, the hidden meaning goes much deeper than the simple idea of divine protection. First, let us think about the angels. It is not hard to imagine celestial beings, powerful, invisible, watching over each of your steps. But the angels God sends are not simply passive guardians. They are not there only to prevent you from falling or to protect you from dangers you see coming. They are there to lift you up when you stumble, when you no longer have strength, when the road seems impossible to continue. And what does this really mean? It means that God knows you will stumble. He knows there will be moments when you feel weak, when your foot slips, when you lose emotional or spiritual balance. Think of Elijah under the broom tree, 1 Kings 19:4-6. He had given up, ready to die, but God sent an angel with bread and water, lifting him up for the journey ahead. That is the meaning of this verse. God knows when you cannot go on, and He sends help to raise you again. Because how many times have you felt like you were falling apart, like you could not go on? It is in those moments of weakness, of vulnerability, that this verse comes alive. God does not promise that you will not stumble. He promises that He will lift you up. And the most surprising thing is how He does it, through His angels. But do not think of angels only as distant, shining celestial beings. Many times those angels arrive in the most unexpected forms. Think of Peter in prison, Acts 12:7. The iron gates were locked, the guards were near, and escape was impossible. Yet an angel of the Lord appeared, touched him, and lifted him to freedom. God's angels often come exactly when you're about to fall the hardest. Divine help does not always arrive with wings and radiant light. Sometimes angels are those people or those signals God places in your life at the very moment you are about to collapse. And here the verse goes even deeper. It does not say in some of your ways. It does not say only when you are on the right path or only when everything is going well. It says in all your ways, even in the paths you choose wrongly, even when you get lost or stray. The angels are still there. God does not abandon you when you take the wrong road. He keeps sending his angels. He keeps lifting you. He keeps making sure you do not stumble so badly that you cannot rise again. Think of Hagar running into the desert with her child, Genesis 21:17. She was lost, desperate, convinced they would die. But an angel of God called out to her and showed her the water she needed. Even when she had strayed, God still sent his angel to lift her up. In those moments when everything seems out of your control and the path is harder than you expected, the angels are lifting you up, not so that you will never fall, but so that when you do, you will not remain on the ground. This is not a promise that God will prevent you from making mistakes or that he will remove every difficulty from your path. It is a promise of closeness, of personal care, because with their own hands implies a direct connection between the Creator and you. It is not something distant. It is not a cold or impersonal protection. God himself lifts you with his hands, with a touch of tenderness and power that tells you that you are not alone, even when you feel defeated. But this verse also carries a message many do not want to accept. You will stumble. There is no way to walk through this life without encountering obstacles, without facing those moments when you feel you cannot continue. Stumbling is inevitable. What this passage promises is not the elimination of stumbles. It promises that they will not be your end. The stumbles will not be final. And what determines whether those moments of falling destroy you or not is whether you allow God, through his angels, to lift you. And then just when you think the message is only about protection and care, you realize this verse is also an invitation to humility. Because in order for the angels to lift you, you must first recognize that you need help. You must admit that you cannot always walk alone, that you will not always be strong enough to avoid the stones on the path. You must allow yourself to be lifted. And for many, that is the hardest thing to accept. It is a promise that when you fall, when the road becomes impossible, when you feel you cannot go on, God will send his angels to lift you. God does not ask you to be perfect. He does not ask you to never stumble. What he asks is that when you do stumble, you have the humility to accept his help, to let his angels lift you, to trust that even if the road is hard, you will never be alone on it. Verse 13, Psalm 91, you will tread on the lion and the cobra. You will trample the great lion and the serpent. At first sight, this verse seems to promise absolute victory, an invincible strength that allows you to defeat the fiercest beasts and the most cunning enemies. But when you begin to unravel what it truly means to tread on the lion and the cobra, you realize it is not as simple as a literal or physical triumph. Behind these words lies a much more personal battle, a struggle that everyone faces but few recognize. First comes the lion. The lion has always symbolized strength, ferocity, something or someone that challenges you openly, that roars and intimidates you. We have all faced lions in our lives. Think of Daniel thrown into the lion's den. Daniel 6:22. Hungry beasts surrounded him, yet God shut their mouths. The lions were real, the threat was real, but Daniel walked out untouched. The verse does not say the lion will never come. It says you will tread on it, not with your own strength, but with God's authority that turns roaring threats into powerless shadows. Maybe for you, the lion is an illness. Maybe it is a crisis that suddenly bursts in like a deafening roar, threatening to destroy everything you have built. The lion does not hide. It comes straight at you. And the most terrifying thing is that you see it coming, but sometimes you feel there is nothing you can do. Yet this verse promises you will trample it. God gives you the strength to crush what should have devoured you. Then comes the cobra. This one is more subtle, more cunning. The cobra does not attack head-on like the lion. It slithers silently, hiding in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Think of Eve in the garden. Genesis 3:1. The serpent came with quiet words, not with open claws. Its venom was deception, not teeth. That is the cobra, the doubts, the betrayals, the poison that sneaks into your life when you least expect it. The verse promises that you will trample it, not by avoiding it, but by recognizing its lies and crushing them with God's truth before they poison your heart. The serpent, since the beginning, has always symbolized deception, temptation, and silent manipulation. And what this verse promises is that you will not only have the strength to defeat what is obvious, like Daniel's lions, but also what is hidden and treacherous, like the serpent in Eden that tries to undermine your faith without you realizing it. But here comes the big question. How can you trample something that seems stronger or more cunning than you? The lion is more powerful. The cobra is more deceitful. And the answer is this: it is not about your strength, it is about your authority. Think of Jesus sending out his disciples and saying, I have given you authority to trample on snakes and scorpions and to overcome all the power of the enemy. Luke 10:19. That same authority is what Psalm 91 points to. The victory is not human, it is divine. And the verse continues, you will trample the great lion and the serpent. This is not a passive image. It is not that you will simply survive these attacks or barely escape them. To trample means to step with authority, to walk over something with confidence and total dominion. You are not only going to survive the lion and the cobra, you are going to walk over them. This changes everything. It is not just a promise that you will be delivered from your problems. It is a promise that you will come out stronger, that you will walk over what once tried to destroy you, that what once made you tremble will now be under your feet. Verse 14, Psalm 91. Because he loves me, says the Lord, I will rescue him, I will protect him, for he acknowledges my name. This is the moment where God himself speaks, where the divine voice breaks through and offers a promise that seems unshakable. But what does it really mean to be rescued? What does it mean to cling to God and acknowledge his name? At first glance, it sounds like a guarantee of protection, that if you trust in him, everything will be fine. But when you dive deeper into these words, you realize the meaning is far more profound and at the same time far more challenging. Let us begin with, I will rescue him because he loves me. Here God is promising deliverance, but there is something many fail to recognize. In order for God to rescue you, first, you must be in a situation where you need to be rescued. This implies that trials, difficulties, and crises are not only possible, but inevitable. Think of Israel trapped at the Red Sea, Exodus 14:13-14. Behind them, Pharaoh's army. In front, an ocean, no escape. Yet it was in that very moment of desperation that God rescued them by parting the waters. He did not deliver them before the danger appeared. He delivered them in the middle of it. That is how God's rescue works. This verse is not telling you that you will not face moments of anguish. In fact, it is hinting that pain, suffering, and hardship are part of the process. But here is the first surprise. The promise is not that you will avoid those moments, but that God will rescue you from them. Not before, not at the beginning, but in the middle of them. And here arises the question, what does it mean to cling to God? The image of clinging is much more powerful than it seems. It is not just a superficial act of trust. It is not simply asking for help in desperate moments. To cling to God means to take refuge in him with your whole being, with total surrender. Think of Ruth when she clung to Naomi, Ruth 1:16. She could have gone back to an easier life, but she chose to stay, declaring, your God will be my God. That is what clinging looks like, holding on with all your heart, even when the road ahead is uncertain. It is an act of surrender, of recognizing that even if everything around you collapses, even if you see no way out, you have decided that your only hope is to take shelter under his wings. To cling to God means acknowledging that you no longer have control, that you cannot do it alone. And that is the hardest part, because for many people, clinging to God means letting go of that desperate desire to control the situation, to search for human solutions. Then the verse continues, going even deeper. I will protect him, for he acknowledges my name. Here, everything changes, because acknowledging the name of God is not just knowing it. It is not simply repeating it in moments of crisis. Acknowledging his name is something much more intimate. In biblical culture, a name represented someone's character, their essence. So when this verse says that God will protect you because you acknowledge his name, it is not talking about simple knowledge. It's talking about a deep, personal relationship. Think of David when he faced Goliath, 1 Samuel 17:45. The giant came with sword and spear, but David declared, "I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty." That is what it means to acknowledge God's name, to trust his character, his power, his faithfulness above everything else. To acknowledge the name of God means you know him in the depths of your being, that you know who he is, not just in theory, but through experience. It means you have walked with him in the darkness, that you have seen his hand move when everything seemed lost, that you have experienced his faithfulness in ways words cannot describe. And here is where the true mystery of this verse is revealed. God's protection does not depend on your perfection, but on your relationship with him. God doesn't protect you because you are flawless or because you always do everything right. He protects you because you know who he is, because you have made him your refuge in the midst of storms, because you have chosen to trust him even when everything else fails. I will protect him, for he acknowledges my name. This is not only a promise of physical protection. This verse goes far beyond earthly circumstances. To acknowledge the name of God means you have understood something many do not see. The true protection of God is not from the things you fear in the outside world. It is from the things that can destroy you inside: fear, despair, doubt, emptiness. The real protection God offers is against those inner forces that try to break your spirit, that try to steal your peace, your faith, your hope. God's protection does not always mean you will avoid pain, loss, or hardship. What it means is that when those things come, and they will, your soul will be safe, because you have acknowledged his name, because you have chosen to cling to him. But this promise is conditional. It is not guaranteed to everyone. It is reserved for those who cling to God, for those who acknowledge his name. This means you cannot simply invoke his protection without first surrendering completely to him. Verse 15, Psalm 91. He will call on me, and I will answer him. I will be with him in trouble. I will deliver him and honor him. At first sight, this verse sounds like a beautiful promise, almost comforting. But when you dive into the words, you discover something far deeper and far more dramatic, because what God is offering here is not just a response, not just deliverance. He is offering his presence in the darkest moments, in the hardest hours of life. And this is where the verse takes an unexpected turn, one that forces you to face the hardest realities of faith. He will call on me, and I will answer him. This phrase seems simple. You cry out, God answers. But how many times have you cried out and the answer did not come the way you expected? How many times have you prayed in desperation and all you felt was silence? Think of Hannah weeping bitterly in the temple. 1 Samuel 1:10-11. She cried out for a son year after year while others mocked her. For a long time it seemed like heaven was silent. Yet God answered in his time, giving her Samuel, the prophet who would change Israel's history. The answer came, but not when she expected. That is the mystery of this verse. God always answers, but not always in the way you think. Picture yourself at the bottom of a pit of anguish, when everything seems lost. In those moments, you cry out to God, asking for a way out, for a miracle, for something to pull you out of the darkness. But God's response is not always to remove you from the darkness immediately. Sometimes his answer is simply this: I am here with you in it. I will be with him in trouble. This is the central point of the verse. God does not promise to keep you from trouble, nor to take you out of it the instant you call. What he promises is his presence. Think of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Daniel 3:25. They were thrown into the fiery furnace, but a fourth figure appeared with them. God did not prevent the fire, but he entered the fire with them. That is what this verse means. And this is the hardest part to accept, because so often what we desire most is not just his presence. We want an immediate solution. We want the trouble to end. We want the pain to vanish. But this verse says something deeper. The true answer of God is not the removal of pain, but his companionship through it. Then comes the next part of the verse, a promise that seems almost contradictory. I will deliver him and honor him. How can you be delivered and at the same time walk through the darkest moments? Here is the key. God's deliverance is not always immediate, nor is it always physical. Sometimes the real deliverance happens in your heart, in that moment when, in the middle of anguish, you discover a strength you did not know you had, a peace that surpasses understanding. Think of Joseph in prison, Genesis 41:14. For years he cried out in suffering, yet God was with him in trouble, and at the right time he lifted Joseph from the dungeon to the palace. The deliverance came after the waiting, but the presence was there all along. The most surprising thing is that many times the process of being delivered first requires walking through the fire. God does not always take you out of the flames, but he promises that when you are in them, you will not be alone. And just when you think deliverance is the end of the process, God adds something more. I will honor him. Most of us think of honor as recognition, success, or rewards. But in the context of this verse, honor is something much deeper. It is the result of having walked through the fire and finding God in the darkest place. The true honor is the transformation that happens in the soul when you discover that in your greatest pain, God was there sustaining you. Honor is not only for the future, it is also for now. Because though we often think the reward of faith comes at the end of the road, what this verse reveals is that the honor is in the very process. Every moment of anguish you endure, every time you cry out to God and find his presence, you are being filled with an invisible but powerful honor. Verse 16, Psalm 91. With long life I will satisfy him and show him my salvation. This verse sounds so clear, so final. Long life and the joy of salvation. Who wouldn't want that? It feels like a promise that sums up humanity's deepest longing, longevity, and at the end of it all, secure salvation. But hidden in these words is something far more powerful and surprising, because what God is promising here is not simply more years on earth. It is the promise of a full life. A life that, though filled with trials and difficulties, ends in a joy and peace that the world cannot give. When God says, "With long life I will satisfy him," it is not just about the number of years you live. It is about the quality of those years. This is not an empty promise of longevity. It is not just living more time. It is about a life filled to the brim with purpose, with meaning, with divine fullness that goes beyond what the world measures in terms of success or achievements. Think of Abraham, Genesis 25:8. Scripture says he died at a good old age, an old man and full of years. His life was not free from trials. He faced famine, war, and even the test of offering Isaac. But every year carried meaning because it was tied to God's covenant. That is the type of satisfaction God promises. Not just years, but years filled with his presence. There are people who live many years yet never feel they have truly lived. God's promise is different. He promises a life filled not just with experiences, but with divine purpose. A life where every day matters, where even the difficult moments carry a deeper meaning because they are connected to His eternal plan. Picture living a life where each year, each day is not just passing time, but an opportunity to experience more of God's grace and mercy. Long life does not mean the absence of problems. You already know there will be struggles, because this very psalm says, "I will be with him in trouble." But what this verse reveals is that God will not only give you more years, those years will be filled with His presence, with the certainty that though storms come, your life is in His hands. And just when you think you understand what long life means, the verse takes a turn. "And show him my salvation." This is the climax, the point where everything makes sense. Because what is the use of a long life if it does not end in salvation? Think of Simeon in the temple, Luke 2:29-30. The Holy Spirit had told him he would not die before seeing the Messiah. And when he finally held the baby Jesus in his arms, he said, "My eyes have seen your salvation." Simeon's long life reached its fullness in that one moment, seeing God's promise fulfilled. Here, God reveals His deepest promise. The true joy is not in the number of years you live, but in knowing that your soul is secure. Salvation is not just something you will receive at the end of life. It is something you can begin to taste here and now. It is a way of life where, even in the middle of challenges, you can be certain that no matter what happens, your future is sealed in eternity. The joy of salvation is that peace that transcends time, that deep knowledge that you are in God's hands and nothing can separate you from Him. It is easy to think of salvation only as the end of pain, the final rest from struggles. But the true joy of salvation is experiencing God in the midst of those struggles. It is knowing that even when life is not easy, even when you face loss, anguish, or uncertainty, your destiny is secure. This joy is something few understand because it is not about superficial happiness. It is not about the kind of joy that comes only when everything is going well. It is a joy that comes from knowing that even when everything goes wrong, your soul is safe. And it is not only a promise for the future, it is a promise for the present. Salvation is not something you wait for at your final breath. It is something you can live in right now. It is the certainty that even if the world around you is filled with chaos, inside of you there's a peace that cannot be destroyed. The joy of salvation is living each day with the knowledge that you have already been rescued, already been redeemed. And here is the most powerful part. This joy does not depend on external circumstances. It does not depend on whether life is easy or hard. The joy of salvation is unshakable because it is not based on what the world gives or takes. It is based on what God has already done for you. You have already been saved. You've already been filled with His grace. And that joy is what allows you to walk through life with unshakable confidence, knowing that in the end, no matter what happens, your life is in the hands of God.